Hello, everyone. Starting this class on Thatcher's Revolution, and as usual, a few minutes or seconds before people start connecting and get online. So, as usual, the chat is open and you can. Sorry, I forgot to change the slide. I forgot to change the profile pic. So it's still about the Mediterranean Sea, but we are dealing with Thatcher Revolution, right? Hello everyone. Hello people connecting. Hi. Okay, so be waiting for 1 or 2 more minutes before we can really start. Hello, good morning everyone. Happy to see you, or not to see you, but to read from you. Hello. Okay, so before we really get into this lesson, just a few things that I'm going to tell you right now, and that will be also a message that you will receive on Pronotes. So please check Pronotes, because the information will be coming for you regarding the history and geography for the OIB, okay, the history and geography program for the end of the year, and what I've planned to do until the written and oral exam. Okay, so sorry, I'm just loading the chat so I can read you, because I had not forgotten to do so. But okay, good. So yes, you will receive information during your holidays. I'm sorry, but as holidays have been moved a bit compared to our original plans, okay, I intend to send you, and that will come during the first week of the holidays, because I will be working on this weekend. I couldn't work on it before. I will prepare a full, when I say full, it's going to be full, like absolutely complete and comprehensive paper on the European Union in geography, because this is definitely the huge part of the syllabus in geography that we've not dealt with yet. I've already started compiling and preparing some information on the European Union. I prefer to warn you right now, it's going to be thick, okay, because I want it to be as comprehensive as possible for you. To say it differently, everything that you need to know about the European Union in the framework of this terminal syllabus will be in it. So yes, it's going to be thick, certainly, possibly 12, 13, 14 pages. I don't know yet, because it's it's in the making, okay? But that means that if you receive this during your holidays and you are able to read it during your holidays, I'm not saying learning it, but read it during your holidays, you will get all the information needed. So after the holidays, we can start working on geography, but more, in the OIB spirit. That is, what type of questions could we expect to have for the examination? What kind of questions and problematic issues should you be able to deal with regarding the European Union? Okay, that will enable to do two things. Firstly, we'll gain some time in the class. Okay. Secondly, we'll be able to make complementary lessons on the years 1970s and 80s in the Cold War, because that's the last part of the syllabus for history. And also just 2 or more classes on, the questions of development strategies and how to adapt to a globalized world as a kind of revision before the written exam, okay? As I've told you already, I have received the key issues and key content. I am not allowed to reveal the content, as you know, because we've got specific dates before we can do this, but be reassured, feel confident that the Cambridge authorities have been clever, have been smart, and have been have adapted to the situation to make sure that all candidates, including you, of course, are in capacity to deal with all the key terms proposed. Okay? The selection of key terms has been very, very crafty, and I dare say it's very, how can I say this? Pupil oriented, to say it clearly. Okay, so really you can feel confident that at the end of the month of May, all the syllabus that you need will have been dealt with. Okay, I commit myself on this, and I owe Cambridge authorities, so praise be rendered to John Nansen, our Cambridge inspector, that he did a great job making sure that in case the exams actually happen, everything will be okay, right? So that was my introduction. Yeah, Kenzo, I know, but I will know. And you know, I'm the referee of my own moral practices and ethics. So no one will tell, but I will know. Okay, right. I know you're joking, of course, because I know you're an ethical person too, and I have no doubt on this. Honestly, right. Now today, not after this long introduction, but that was a great way to enable people who want to join us to do that. I'm going to start what will be the final study regarding the United Kingdom. And it's called Thatcher, a Revolution. So I will also put on Moodle plenty of papers regarding Thatcher, okay? Because that's something which is a legacy from the previous syllabus. So everything is prepared on this. The question we're dealing with is not actually narrating the Thatcher years. It's not telling the history of how Margaret Thatcher, that you can see on the caricature here, she's on the right hand side, and she's rolling a carpet with John Maynard Keynes in it. We're going to explain this cartoon in a few minutes. So Margaret Thatcher, she was the first prime minister. She was the first prime minister, female prime minister in the history of the UK. But that's not her major legacy. Her major legacy is that she actually broke and dismantled the consensus that had established in the previous years, not only in the United Kingdom, but globally in the Western world, in the industrial world. She was a proponent, she was a supporter of massive liberal reforms. She dismantled the Keynesian consensus. She certainly transformed the UK on a wide scale, in vast amounts, okay, in a large proportion. And what we need to study is, was she that revolutionary? Okay? Maybe if you want to understand the impact she had on the UK, I would like to show you. Yes, Mail, sorry, I couldn't see what you've written. Absolutely. This is the following. It's a new chapter, if you prefer. It's a new part of the lesson, but that comes after we have studied the labor reforms. So we studied the labor reforms. If you remember, then we made a chart showing the long-term impact of the labor reforms between the 50s and the 70s. This is the next lesson. So actually you can open a new chapter if you want, because it's a lesson, it's in the continuity of what we've done previously, but that's clearly a new chapter, or to say it differently, it can be evaluated, it could be evaluated. There are chances, existent chances, that it could be evaluated either in the oral or in the written exam, or in the oral exam, or in the written exam, or maybe orally. It could happen. I'm just, it's just hypothesis. So it can be evaluated in itself. Okay, good. So before we start, I would like to show you something. Margaret Thatcher, she left power in 1990, and she died 23 years later. She died in 2013. let me show you something. Let me show you how a very working class neighborhood in London, which is Brixton. Brixton is a working class neighborhood. It's also a Jamaican and Pakistani neighborhood. It has a lot of working class people and people from the immigration coming from the former Commonwealth coming to the UK. So it's working class. And this is how people in this neighborhood, Brixton, reacted when they learned of Margaret Thatcher's death. So I'm just going to make a screen capture. Hope it's going to work and that you can actually hear what's happening. If you don't, please let me know. Here we go. Right. Ding dong, the witch is dead.
That woman made my youth a misery. I think that she was to blame for most of the ills in society, and most of the things that poor people and ill people have now been blamed for were her fault.
So if you can read this, rejoice, Thatcher is dead.
Thatcher's death, I think, is a celebration around the world. Millions of people know she started a legacy, and that legacy was turning over public services and starting the greed for the bankers. And I think everyone knows it started in Britain, and she continued that across her legacy continued. And today, everyone who don't want that are celebrating.
I am celebrating, yeah. I'm celebrating the fact that Margaret Thatcher is dead today, and I'm here to celebrate with everyone else, symbolically, to just say everything she stood for, I'm opposed to. And I'm proud to be with people that come out here and say, I am celebrating, yeah. She started the whole neoliberal madness that we're all suffering from now. And people in Brixton suffered. People in Brixton suffered directly because of her policies.
Okay, sorry. Good. So, sorry, I'm just getting rid of this. That's it. Okay, so I hope you were able to hear what I said, but globally you've certainly understood. And there are two things I need to say before I keep on. Firstly, that was not a massive demonstration neither. As you can see, you didn't have millions of people onto the streets just celebrating the death of Margaret Thatcher. That was a bunch of people, a few tens, possibly a few hundreds of people. So it should not be overestimated. But in the meantime, it's not so common. It's not so common in democracies. I'm talking about democracies, that people would go onto the street to publicly rejoice of a politician's or a former politician's death. What I mean is that whatever happens in private households, you know, sometimes you may be happy that a personality you don't like has gone, but there's a gap between doing this and you know, going onto the street and say, yeah, I'm so happy that she or he died. So even if that was only a few people, that also reveals how controversial and how, I would say, binary a personality she was. She was praised by many in the conservative side and even in the non-conservative side for really bringing her touch into the British system and for starting a revolution that you can call the Thatcher Revolution. And that's exactly what we're going to try and evaluate starting today and pursuing after the holidays. But for other people, she was the one who totally dismantled, which is something which is said in the video. She totally dismantled the public services. She privileged, she gave a preference to the upper classes of society. You can hear one man saying that she served the bankers, okay? She actually was in favor. She was a strong supporter of the financial system in the UK, and she encouraged the move. She encouraged the shift from British industry to British services, and mostly financial and banking services, high value services. And so she brought back economic growth into the UK, but also in the meantime, clearly her policies fragilized and weakened the poorest portions of society, the poorest population in the UK. When she left power in 1990, more than 20% of the British population was living below the poverty line. Okay, so to answer your question, Theo, I think these people were partly middle, partly working class, okay? And certainly most of them were activists from the left wing, or maybe they were, working for organizations that were that had an activity in the social field or political left-wing political field. They certainly were not a mirror of the whole British society. They were biased in their view, right? Certainly left-wing or working class people. If you look at this, that's another document I wanted to start with, and then of course I will give you more facts, but that's another caricature which was published when she died, and it was published by Cal, okay, K-A-L. You can read his name at on the bottom right hand corner. He's one of the most famous American cartoonists, right? He's published in plenty of very influential newspapers like the New York Times and so on. And so when she dies, you can see that she was allowed in the club of the Historic Figures Society. And in this club, I'm sure you can recognize. So on the left-hand side, we can recognize kings and queens. You can certainly recognize Queen Victoria. There is a painting on the wall in the background, and you may identify Charles V, Charles Quint. Okay, or is it Henry VIII? Possibly it's Henry VIII, sorry. Then you've got a bunch of very famous people. You've got Ronald Reagan. You've got Winston Churchill and his cigar. By his side, you can see Stalin. You can see General de Gaulle and his nose. Okay, and in the foreground, partly hidden, you can certainly recognize and identify Mao Zedong and Adolf Hitler. So this cartoon was here to say that she certainly deserved a specific position in history. She certainly deserved to be considered a major personality. Okay. She also is an exception as being with Queen Victoria, but she was the only actual political leader. Queen Victoria, she led, but actually the Prime Minister in the UK had power, whereas she had the power for herself as being a Prime Minister in the UK. And the other element, of course, which is irony, is that Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher is escorted by economist John Maynard Keynes. And you can see that Keynes is totally imprisoned and made incapable of doing anything by Margaret Thatcher, rolling him into and tying him into a carpet. Because that's also part of Margaret Thatcher's legacy. She was instrumental in getting rid of Keynesian policies. Okay? Right. So, that's a legacy. Certainly a major political figure. Okay, maybe the equal of Charles de Gaulle or Ronald Reagan, or maybe not Stalin, but in the meantime, as you could see just a few minutes ago, she was hated and she was rejected as a controversial figure, bringing more poverty, dismantling the public services, and so on. Okay, right. Was my introduction okay for you? Was it clear what I've tried to show you? Now, we are going to work in 3 parts, okay? And the 3 parts will be, firstly, what is a revolution? You certainly know it from last year because you've studied for a long time what a revolution is. It means that you're going to change radically. You're going to change massively. You're going to transform society to get to a new start, because this is what a revolution is, physically speaking. When you make a revolution, you make a whole turn. And you start from almost scratch, or you start a new cycle again. So if you want to see what a revolution is, you need to compare to the previous situation. Let me give you one example. If Thatcher, absolutely, Theo, that's a very good remark. Because actually you're starting answering the question. So it's a very relevant remark you make. To know if there was a revolution, we need to see, did she, Margaret Thatcher, and her policies, did she really change everything? Was she the only one bringing change into the UK? And this is what we're going to start studying today. I would like to insist on something today and show you that actually, as you know it, and as Theo has just asked, she was not the first to question Keynesianism. She was not the first to say that maybe Keynesian policies and the welfare state and the labor reforms had a negative impact. Let me show you something. So if you want to take notes, sorry, I forgot to tell you something. If you want to take notes, and you should take some just to start learning and organizing things and sorting things out in your head, because there will be papers that will totally explain this. But if you want to take notes, that could be part of a first approach, and the first approach would be Thatcher before Thatcher, or to say it differently, what part of the consensus, what part of the Keynesian policies already were challenged before Thatcher. Okay? This is something we've already discussed on last Tuesday, okay? The fact that you had liberal people starting in World War II, people like Hayek or Friedman. Also that people starting saying that the model was too expensive or that it was not efficient. So she was not the first to challenge this. She was not the first to question this Keynesian model. Okay? Actually, a previous conservative prime minister had done this before, and his name was Edward Heath, Heath. Let me show you this. Sorry, I have to add a document for you to see. I'm sorry, it's a bit long because it's not in the proper folder. Here it is. Here we go. Right. This is the beginning of an article which was published in 2005 by The Guardian. The Guardian is a left-wing newspaper in the UK. It's published in Manchester. It was originally called the Manchester Guardian. It's left-wing, okay? And it was, in the 1980s, it was rather critical of Margaret Thatcher, okay? And more generally, it's critical of the conservative governments, okay? And this article was published because in 2005, a book was written by a British historian about the 1974 elections. If you remember what I explained you when we did the labor reforms, there are general elections every 5 years in the UK, but 5 years is the maximum gap between two elections, but a prime minister can decide to hold elections, anticipated elections, whenever they want. You remember this? That's something I've explained. So general elections elect the Parliament, the House of Commons, for maximum 5 years. But when a Prime Minister considers it's a favourable moment or there is a necessity, the Prime Minister, they can decide to organise and hold anticipated elections. This is what happened in 1974. The Prime Minister at that time, you can read his name in the middle of the text, was called Edward Heath. Okay? And Heath, he had tried to reform the system. He had tried to reform the welfare state. He had tried to make reforms in the UK that were more liberal and maybe less favorable to the consensus. And I'm going to read this article because it refers to a very specific moment in the British history, contemporary history. 1974 was arguably, the most dramatic year in modern British politics, as well as two elections. There was the 3-day week. I'm going to explain this right. The 3-day week. Corruption scandals, shadowy plots against the Prime Minister, a financial crisis, the Irish Republican Army bombings in England, and a general strike in Northern Ireland. It began with a strike by the powerful NUM, the National Union of Mine Workers, whose bargaining position had become even stronger because of the steep rise in the oil price. In order to preserve fuel supplies, the Conservative government of Edward Heath imposed a 3-day working week. 3-day working week for the miners. After some hesitation, many Conservatives believed that they could have won an election in early February. Heath called an election for February 28 with the intentions of strengthening his hand against the unions. The unions are the trade unions. Who governs? Asked the Conservatives. A question whose implications were more ambiguous than they intended. Okay, let me explain you what this refers to. The Conservatives believed that in the 1970s, too much power was in the hands of the trade unions. If you remember, a trade union is an organization to defend the workers' right, okay? And in many strategic sectors, the railwaymen, the dockers, the mine workers, the miners, these trade unions were in capacity to block the British economy. And actually, they could do this by going on strike. Look at the date, 1974. This is 5 years. 5 years before Margaret Thatcher would be elected as Prime Minister. This is, listen to me, that's very important. This is 1 year after the 1973 oil shock. I'm sure you've already heard of this. You can take some notes on this if you want. In 1973, there was a conflict in the Middle East. And this conflict, which is called the Kippur War, was a war between Israel and its Arab neighbors. This was not the first war between Israel and Arab states, okay? There had been the 6-Day Wars before, the Suez War before, the 1948 war before. Anyway, this time, the Arab states, many of which were oil producers, decided to use oil as leverage against Israel and its Western allies. If you prefer, they exerted some leverage by saying, if the Western states, the USA, France, the UK, keep on supporting Israel by, selling weapons or sending economic aid to Israel, then we are going to retaliate by multiplying the price of oil by 4. In a few weeks, a barrel of oil jumped from $3 a barrel to $12. Okay, so for us, $12 is still relatively cheap. But can you imagine that in a few days, the price of oil was multiplied by 4, and that affected the industrial world a lot. In the UK, the miners who were mining for coal, they felt that this strengthened their position because now coal was even more important for the UK. As the oil importation were becoming more expensive, coal was a kind of safety net for the British economy. So the miners say, oh, you need us. Okay, we want to work less because we're doing a very dangerous and exhausting job, which is definitely the case. So what happened? The miners were in capacity. They were in capacity to impose their conditions on the government. That refers to the quotation on line 5 that says they were in a bargaining position. They were in a good position to reach a deal favorable to them. And this is why Edward Heath, a Conservative Prime Minister, wanted to hold an election, because he said, who governs Britain? The government of Britain should be in the hands of the government, in the head of the government and the head of the parliament. It is not in any case the role of trade unions, which are globally left-wing, It is not the role of trade unions to impose their conditions on the British economy. So who governs the UK? And he organised an election. And the Conservatives lost the election. The Labour got a majority. So it means that, as you can see, the power of the trade unions, the capacity of the government to impose reforms, that was already a question in 1974. Also, last time we met on Tuesday, I also referred to the 1917 IMF crisis, if you remember this. Maybe I can show that to you again. I'm just doing this. Where is that? Sorry, I'm just preparing the document for you to see. I will send it to you because I now realize that you didn't have it. Sorry, I'm just going to project my screen once again. Okay, here we are. Good. Here we go. I hope you can see that. Yes, that's it. Okay. In 1976, the Callaghan cabinet, Callaghan was a Labour Prime Minister, he had to commit himself into cuts in public spendings. And the left wing of the Labour and the trade unions opposed this. And the consequence, if you remember, was that unemployment actually increased. And look at this, a few more figures to help you understand. You will get this paper, This paper will come to your Moodle reserve and storage. In 1969, there had already been a white paper, a memo, to say that the right to strike should be limited. In 1951, strikes had cost the UK's economy 1.7 million working days. It means that the equivalent of 1.7 working days had been lost in strikes. In 1970, it was 11 million working days being lost. And so what does that mean? What does that mean? That sorry, I'm back. It means that there was a feeling which got stronger in the 1970s, that it was time for the model to be reformed. But the problem was that the conservative governments couldn't get a majority. Okay, the conservative government couldn't get a long-term majority to implement more liberal reforms. When James Callaghan, a Labour Prime Minister, started to do these reforms, he couldn't go too far to reform the system because his own electors were in favor of the trade unions. His own electors were in favor of the welfare state. His own electors considered that the Keynesian model, which had been implemented by the Labour after World War II, was a system to be preserved. Okay? Is that clear for you what I'm saying? So if you want to say that there was a Thatcher revolution, and once again the paper I've just shown you will come to you, so you can revise this calmly. But what you should write right now, as a preparation for a potential question on this, is that Thatcher was not the first one to analyze the loopholes, to analyze the failures, if you want, or the fragilities, or the problems of the Keynesian consensus. The fact that the UK's economy was having a higher and higher unemployment, that the UK's economy was facing difficulties to be competitive in the framework of globalization and the rise of Asian economies. Or to say it differently, she was not the first one to say that massive reforms, drastic reforms, liberal reforms were needed in the United Kingdom. Okay? Right? So if there was the Thatcher revolution, maybe it's not in the thinking. Maybe it's more in the way she implemented the reforms that she promoted. Okay? Do you have questions at that point? Because if you have questions at that point, it might be better for me to answer them and address them now before we move on to, so what did she do? And how did she get there? How did she get to power? And how did she manage to start implementing her reforms? Are there any questions? While you're considering the possibility of having questions, I'm loading more documents for you. Okay? Right. So no question apparently? No. So either you're already too hungry for questions, or I'm very clear, or both, hopefully. Okay, anyway. Right, sorry. Right. I'm showing you this, and once again, you'll get this in the amount of paper that you will receive on Moodle. If there was a Thatcher revolution, it was firstly that she was a person of conviction. What I mean is that maybe that was a revolution actually. She came to power with very clear intentions and very clear statements on what she aimed to do. And that she did it. What I mean is that in the previous years, you had prime ministers. Edward Heath was one of them. Possibly James Callaghan was one of them. They had, mentioned that they should start reform, that they were on the verge of doing reforms, that they were committed to change the UK, and partly because of their own choices, partly because of the context, they couldn't implement the reforms they wanted to. Margaret Thatcher did what she had claimed, what she had promised to do. Once again, I'm not saying it's good or bad in itself, okay? What I mean is that maybe you can say, oh, that's good, you make promise and then you implement them. Okay, in that case, Adolf Hitler was also a very convinced politician. You know what I mean? I'm not comparing Thatcher and Hitler at all. I'm just saying being a conviction politician is not enough in itself, but actually she was. What were her convictions? That's something you should refer to if you were asked. She was influenced by the liberal thinkers. Some of them I've already mentioned. For example, Friedrich von Hayek, new free market ideas, and a man who was an economist. He was called Keith Joseph, and he was inspired by the monetarist or monetarianist, you can use both, policies. Margaret Thatcher was a liberal thinker. She believed in free market. She rejected socialism. Okay? That's something she shared with US President Ronald Reagan. She considered that the state was the problem and not the solution. She considered, you should remember this, she considered that the state was the problem and not the solution. And that's something she shared. That's something she shared with US President Ronald Reagan. Politically and economically speaking, these two people, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, they were like soulmates. They got along very well. They shared the same perspective and the same conception of what the economy and politics should be. What does that mean? It means that, just going there. Margaret Thatcher aims were to, and she was elected to do that in 1979. She campaigned to end the consensus that had been established by the Labour. She was opposed to Keynesianism because she thought Keynesian policies were too expensive. She wanted to cut government spendings. And as you know, the problem with governmental spendings in that they include the welfare state. So, of course, that means you have to be ready to be unpopular. And as you could see at the beginning of this class, she became unpopular at some point. If you want to reverse Keynesianism, that means you need to give the priority. Reducing this. You need to give the priority to business and not the priority to state spendings and social allowances. So she promoted cutting taxes. Reducing taxes. Both on business, on corporations, and on the people. I will explain you why. She wanted to reduce public services and reduce bureaucracy. Okay, that's something which is very, very regularly mentioned in the liberal ideas. Too many public servants. Actually, when we conclude on this, we'll see that neoliberalism is not always very good at reducing bureaucracy, but that's not for now. And finally, she wanted less government. Okay, she wanted less government and more private initiative. Another of her motto, that's something you should write. Another of her motto was, there is no such thing as society. That's one of most famous quotation. Okay, it is actually the title of a book, of a history book, which was published to tell the history of the 1980s in the UK. What does that mean? It means that she was a strong believer in... sorry, I'm adding some information. She was a believer in private initiative. She believed that people should rely on personal ethics. And she believed in the value of the self. To say it in another way, if you want, she believed in individualistic ethics. People get what they personally deserve. Okay? That's highly liberal. Rely on yourself. Okay? Develop your own capacities, develop your own skills, and don't count too much or don't rely too much on the state. Or to say it differently, maybe you will recognize something I've already said. Sorry, I'm just checking if there is any question in the chat in between, but absolutely, Pierre. It's a belief in individualism. It's a criticism of the nanny state. Remember the nanny state? That's something I've mentioned. When the state is there for you all your life long, you're not free. There is always someone in the back or just above you checking if you're doing the good things. Are you wearing the mask? Are you wearing the mask? If you don't, you can get fined. That's the nanny state. The state knows what is good for you. What is good for you is to stay at home and having online classes. I'm not saying it's good or bad, right? I'm just saying that's the nanny state. I'm at home, you're at home, and we wear a mask because the state says it's better for you and for society. An individualist approach, a Thatcherian approach would be to say, people know what is good for themselves, so we should let the state, we should let the people do what is good for them, and the state should not tell them. So, society does not exist. There are only individuals. If you're poor, you owe it to yourself. If you've made it as a millionaire, your personal value is the reason. Your commitment, your work has made you what you are. Or your lack of work, idleness, has made you what you are. Okay? So these are the value she promoted. I would also tell you something. I've got a few minutes left. I would like to take 5 more minutes because that will enable me to stop on what her perceptions were. And so after the holidays, we can see what did she do with that? What did she really implement with that? Though a woman, she clearly was anti-feminist. In the feminist movements today and in the UK, she's always referred to like this, a woman, but not a sister. She always say that she should never be considered as a woman, right? She said, having to tell that you're a woman in politics is like... being a woman in politics is like having power or being powerful, she said. If you have to mention it all the time, it's because you're not really, okay, one. So if you have to say you're a woman in politics, it means you're not really a politician. And so she never referred to this. What I mean is that, for example, while she was prime minister, the conditions of working class women in the UK degraded badly. Women in the UK, especially single women that were raising their kids alone, for example, they suffered from the decrease of the family allowances. So that's not a paradox, I guess, it's just a fact, okay? But the fact that she was the first female prime minister in the UK meant nothing particularly good, nor bad, I mean, for women in the UK. What counted was what social class did you belong to? What category did you belong to? If you were a woman from the upper class, certainly you benefited from Margaret Thatcher policies. If you were a woman from the working class or from a destitute neighborhood, certainly your situation degraded as for all the other people in this situation. So this is who she was. Maybe one element of biography, I'm not going to do something like my colleague would do, like spend 6 hours on Margaret Thatcher and who she was, but her father was a grocer, okay? He was not a rich man, he was not a wealthy man, he was a grocer, and she grew up working and helping a father in a grocery. So that certainly made her more responsive to, the value of work, the value of getting up early and going to bed late because you were dealing with your own business and the survival of your family was depending on your own work and so on. And certainly that helped Margaret Thatcher become who she was, because she could always refer to, I know what it is to be from the middle class or from the low upper class and having to work a lot and so on and on. Okay, so that's also part of what made her who she was. So she certainly was a person of conviction. She certainly was a person that was strongly committed to the liberal values, the values of the self, the value of individualism. She was anti-socialist. She was a huge critic of socialism, and she was absolutely in hatred with communism. Okay. Now, before I put an end to this lesson, to this class today, if you're okay with that, for the week when we go back to school but online, okay, for the first week after holidays, if you are okay, I would like to do this. I would like to teach you on Tuesday in the morning. We're supposed to have accompagnement personnalisé on the first Tuesday. I would like to use this class for an online class, if you're okay with that. Secondly, I will teach the class in the afternoon too, from 4 to 5:30. And if you're also okay with that, I know Monsieur Heropoulos won't use his classes on Wednesday, okay? And exceptionally, I will ask my première spécialité to let me teach you the class, so we can be sure that in this week after the holidays, which is an online class, we can complete this study of Margaret Thatcher and the UK. And that will enable us, when we go back to class the week after, to work on geography and the European Union using the paper you will have gotten during the holidays. And I know that will mean a lot of classes online and so on during the first week, but honestly, and that will also mean extra work for me, so I'm not doing this for me, but I think you will have rested after your holidays. You'll be ready maybe to take more online classes. And I think that's the best strategy we can adapt if we want to make sure you come to the exam fully prepared. Okay? I will send you a message confirming this. Let me know if there is any opposition, massive opposition to this. But I think it's really the best for you and for our preparation pace. Okay? Right. People, I'm going to leave you right now. I've got a class at 2 and I would like to have lunch, and you certainly need lunch too. Please don't forget there are Parcoursup compulsory validations waiting for you to click on the button and say that you validated your applications. Okay? Right? Any question? Do you have any question on this? No? Okay. So I will leave you right now, and hopefully, yeah, absolutely, Kenzo. It takes what it takes to be successful. Okay, have a good day. Enjoy your holidays, and see you soon, people. And good luck with your work during the holidays. I know it's going to be tough, but We're gonna make it. This is what Hiram Smith used to say. So, bye-bye. See you soon.